Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars. Now, for some reason, I said this had 23 chapters in it. I accidentally included The Empire Strikes Back in that. There's only 13, so we're more than capable of getting through this book before, whatchamacallit, the Force Awakens comes out in theaters. What? I don't know. Anyway, we are on page 139, chapter 8. Doing real well. Adam's here. Say hi. He waves. Oh, real quick before I forget. New lightsaber. Quick, guess the color. Did you guess? Were you right? Look at that hilt design. Anyway. And this one, guess the color. Did you guess? Were you right this time? Anyway. Back to the book. Solo was busily checking readouts from gauges. Do you say gauges or gauges? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to start a war on that. Do you say GIF or GIF? I say GIF. Oh no, I've just killed myself on the internet. That's actually how it's supposed to be pronounced. Don't listen to anyone who says GIF. And dials in the hold area. Occasionally he would pass a small box across various sensors, study the result, and cluck with pleasure. How do you cluck? Let me know. You can stop worrying about your Imperial friends, he told Luke and Ben. They'll never be able to track us now. Told you I'd lose them. Kenobi might have nodded briefly in response, but he was engaged in explaining something to Luke. Don't everybody thank me at once, Solo grunted, slightly miffed. Anyway, navigation computer calculates our arrival in Alderaan orbit at 0200. I'm afraid after this little adventure I'll have to forge a new registration. He returned to his checking, passing in front of a small circular table. The top was covered with small squares lit from beneath, while computer monitors were set into each side. Tiny three-dimensional figures were projected above the tabletop from various squares. Chewbacca sat hunched over one side of the table, his chin resting in massive hands. I imagine something like this. His great eyes glowing and facial whiskers wrinkled upward. Sounds like my one cat. He gave every sign of being well pleased with himself. At least he did until R2-D2 reached up with a stubby clawed limb across from him and tapped his own computer monitor. One of the figures walked abruptly across the board to a new square and stopped there. An expression of puzzlement and then anger crossed the Wookiee's face as he studied the new configuration. Glaring up over the table, he vented a stream of abusive gibberish. That's offensive to say. Just because you don't understand someone else's language doesn't mean you get to call it gibberish. Sorry. Or excuse me, gibberish. Where was I? Oh yes. On the inoffensive machine, R2 could only beep in reply, but 3PO soon interceded on behalf of his less eloquent companion and began arguing with the hulking anthropoid. He executed a fair move. Screaming about it won't help you. Attracted by the commotion, Solo looked back over his shoulder, frowning slightly. Let him have it. Your friend's way ahead anyhow. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee. I can sympathize with that opinion, sir, 3PO countered. But there is principle at stake here. There are certain standards any sentient creature must hold to. If one compromises them for any reason, including intimidation, then one is abrogating his right to be called intelligent. I hope you'll both remember that, Solo advised, when Chewbacca is pulling the arms off of you and your little friend. Besides that, however, 3PO continued without missing a beat, being greedy or taking advantage of someone in a weakened position is a clear sign of poor sportsmanship. That is a great way to look at it. That elicited a beep of outrage from R2, and the two robots were soon engaged in violent electronic argument while Chewbacca continued jabbering at each in turn, occasionally waving at them through the translucent pieces, waiting patiently on the board. Oblivious to the altercation, Luke stood frozen in the middle of the hold. He held an activated lightsaber in position over his head. A low hum came from the ancient instrument, while Luke lunged and parried under Ben Kenobi's instructive gaze. As Solo glanced from time to time at Luke's awkward movements, his lean features were sprinkled with smugness. No, Luke, your cuts should flow, not be so choppy. I have that problem also. Let me know if you'd like to see me try and practice with the lightsaber. Hopefully I can get some funny moments in. Kenobi instructed gently, remember, the Force is omnipresent. It envelops you as it radiates from you. A Jedi warrior can actually feel the Force as a physical thing. It is an energy field, then? Luke inquired. It is an energy field, and something more, Kenobi went on almost mystically. An aura that at once controls and obeys. It is a nothingness that can accomplish miracles. He looked thoughtful for a moment. No one, not even the Jedi scientists, were able to truly define the Force. Possibly no one ever will. This is where a lot of people hate George Lucas. Most, I think, out of all the prequel trilogy problems. Sometimes there is as much magic as science in the explanations of the Force, yet what is a magician but a practicing theorist? That's a good way to look at it. Now, let's try again. The old man was hefting a silvery globe about the size of a man's fist. It was covered with fine antennae. Antenna? Some as delicate as those of a moth. He flipped it toward Luke and watched as it halted a couple of meters away from the boy's face. Luke readied himself as the ball circled him slowly, turning to face it as it assumed a new position. Abruptly, it executed a lightning-swift lunge, only to freeze about a meter away. Luke failed to succumb to the feint, and the ball soon backed off. I would have flinched. Moving slowly to one side in an effort to get around the ball's four sensors. That's F-O-R-E. Meaning front. Never mind. Luke drew the saber back preparatory to striking. As he did so, the ball darted in behind him. A thin pencil of red light jumped from one of the antennae to the back of Luke's thigh, knocking him to the deck even as he was bringing his saber around too late. Rubbing at the tingling, sleeping leg, Luke tried to ignore the burst of accusing laughter from Solo. Hocus-pocus religion and archaic weapons are no substitute for a good blaster at your side, the pilot sneered. You don't believe in the Force? Asked Luke, struggling back to his feet. The numbing effect of the beam wore off quickly. It's a good practice instrument. I've been from one end of this galaxy to the other, the pilot boasted, and I've seen a lot of strange things. Too many to believe there couldn't be something like this Force. Too many to think that there could be something, some such controlling one's actions. I determine my destiny, not some half-mystical energy field. He gestured toward Kenobi. I wouldn't follow him so blindly if I were you. He's a clever old man, full of simple tricks and mischief. He might be using you for his own needs. That sounds gross. Kenobi only smiled gently. See, that's how you take criticism like that. You just shrug it off. Excuse me. Then turned back to face Luke. I suggest you try it again, Luke, he said soothingly. You must try to divorce your actions from conscious control. Yes, because divorce is always the answer. What? Try not to focus on anything concrete, visually or mentally. You must let your mind drift. Only then can you use the Force. You have to enter a state in which you act on what you sense, not on what you think beforehand. You must cease cogitation? Relax, stop thinking, let yourself drift. Free. Breathe. The old man's voice had dropped to a mesmerizing buzz. As he finished, the chrome bulbs darted at Luke. Dazed by Kenobi's hypnotic tone, Luke didn't see it charge. It's doubtful he saw much of anything with clarity, but as the ball neared, He whirled with amazing speed, the lightsaber arching up and out in a peculiar fashion. The red beam that the globe emitted was neatly deflected to one side. Its humming stopped, and the ball bounced to the deck, all animation gone. Blinking as if coming awake from a short nap, Luke stared in absolute astonishment on the inert remote. "You see, you can do it," Kenobi told him. "One can teach only so much. Now you must learn to admit the Force when you want it, so that you can learn to control it consciously." Where was I? Moving to one side, Kenobi took a large helmet from behind a locker and walked over to Luke. Placing the helmet over his head effectively eliminated the boy's vision. "I can't see," Luke muttered, turning around and forcing Kenobi to step back out of range of the dangerously wavering lightsaber. "How can I fight?" "With the Force," old Ben explained. "You didn't really see the Seeker when it went for your legs the last time, and yet you parried its beam. Try to let that sensation flow within you again." "I can't do it," Luke moaned. "I'll get hit again." "Not if you let yourself trust you," Kenobi insisted, none too convincingly for Luke. "This is the only way to be certain you are relying wholly on the Force." Noticing that the skeptical Corellian had turned to watch, Kenobi hesitated momentarily. It did Luke no good to have the self-assured pilot laugh every time a mistake was made, but coddling the boy would do him no good either, and there was no time for it anyway. "Throw him in and hope he floats," Ben instructed himself firmly. Yeah, that's what my dad did when he taught me how to swim so we could get into this country." "What?" Bending over the chrome globe, he touched a control at its side. Then he tossed it straight up. It arched toward Luke. Breaking in mid-fall, the ball plummeted stone-like toward the deck. Luke swung the saber at it. While it was a commendable try, it wasn't nearly fast enough. Once again, the little antenna glowed. This time, the crimson needle hit Luke square on the seat of his pants. Ouch! Though it wasn't an incapacitating blow, it felt like one, and Luke let out a yelp of pain as he spun, trying to strike his invisible tormentor. "Relax," old Ben urged him. "Be free. You're trying to use your eyes and ears. Stop predicting and use the rest of your mind." Suddenly, the youth stopped, wavering slightly. The Seeker was still behind him, changing direction again. It made another dive and fired. Simultaneously, the lightsaber jerked around, as accurate as it was awkward in its motion to deflect the bolt. This time, the ball didn't fall motionless to the deck. Instead, it backed up 3 meters and remained there, hovering. Aware that the drone of the Seeker remote and no longer assaulted his ears, a cautious Luke peeked out from under the helmet. Sweat and exhaustion competed for space on his face. "I told you you could," Kenobi informed him with pleasure. "Once you start to trust your inner self, there will be no stopping you. I told you there was much of your father in you." "I'd call it luck," snorted Solo as he concluded his examination of the readouts. "In my experience, there is no such thing as luck, my young friend. Only highly favorable adjustments of multiple factors to incline events in one's favor." I mean, that's just kind of semantics. Call it what you like, the Corellian sniffed indifferently. "But good against the mechanical remote is one thing, good against the living menace is another." As he was speaking, a small telltale light on the far side of the hold began flashing. Chewbacca noticed it and called out to him. Solo glanced at the board and then informed his passengers, "We're coming up on Alderaan. We'll be slowing down shortly and going back under light speed. Come on, Chewie." See, I was really hoping Chewie would look like me, and then he didn't, and I was kind of sad, but I love Wookiees, so it's okay. Rising from the game table, the Wookiee followed his partner toward the cockpit. Luke watched them depart, but his mind wasn't on their imminent arrival at Alderaan. It was burning with something else, something that seemed to grow and mature at the back of his brain as he dwelt on it. "You know," he murmured, "Oi. I did feel something. I could almost see the outlines of the remote." He gestured at the hovering device behind him. Kenobi's voice, when he replied, was solemn. "Luke, you've taken the first step into a larger universe." Dozens of humming, buzzing instruments lent to the freighter's cockpit the air of a busy hive. Solo and Chewbacca had their attention locked on the most vital of those instruments. "Steady, stand by, Chewie." Solo adjusted several manual compensators. Ready to go to sublight. Ready. Cut us in, Chewie. The Wookiee turns something on the console before him. At the same time, Solo pulled back on a comparatively large lever. Or do you say lever? Let me know. Abruptly, the long streaks of Doppler-distorted starlight slowed to hyphen shapes, then finally to familiar bolts of fire. A gauge on the console registered 0. Gigantic chunks of glowing stone appeared out of the nothingness, barely shunted aside by the ship's deflectors. The strain caused the Millennium Falcon to begin shuddering violently. What the? A thoroughly startled Solo muttered. Next to him, Chewbacca offered no comment of his own as he flipped off several controls and activated others. Only the fact that the cautious Solo always emerged from supralight travel with his deflectors up, just in case any of the many unfriendly folks might be waiting for him, had saved the freighter from instant destruction. Luke fought to keep his balance as he made his way into the cockpit. What's going on? We're back in normal space, Solo informed him, but we've come out in the middle of the worst asteroid storm I've ever seen. It's not on any of our charts. He peered hard at several indicators. According to the Galactic Atlas, our position is correct. The only thing missing, Alderaan. Missing? But that's crazy. I won't argue with you, the Corellian replied, but look for yourself. He gestured out over the port. I've triple-checked the coordinates, and there's nothing wrong with the nav pewter. We ought to be standing out one planetary diameter from the surface. The planet's glow should be filling the cockpit, but there's nothing out there. Nothing but debris. He paused. Judging from the level of wild energy outside and the amount of solid waste, I'd guess that Alderaan's been blown away. Totally. Destroyed, Luke whispered, overwhelmed at the specter raised by such an unimaginable disaster. But how? The Empire, a voice declared firmly. Ben Kenobi had come in behind Luke, and his attention was held by the emptiness ahead, as well as the import behind it. No, Solo was shaking his head slowly. In his own way, even he was stunned by the enormity of what the old man was suggesting, that a human agency had been responsible for the annihilation of an entire population, of a planet itself. No, the Empire fleet couldn't have done it. They would have taken 1,000 ships, massing a lot more firepower than has ever existed. I wonder if we should get out of here, Luke was murmuring, trying to see around the rims of the port. If by some chance it was the Empire, I don't know what's happened here, an angry Solo cursed, but I'll tell you one thing, the Empire isn't... Muffled alarms began humming loudly as a synchronous light flashed on the control console. Solo bent to appropriate the instrumentation. Another ship, he announced. Can't judge the type yet. A survivor, maybe. Someone who might know what happened, Luke ventured hopefully. Ben Kenobi's next words shattered more than that hope. That's an Imperial fighter. Chewbacca suddenly gave an angry bark. A huge flower of destruction blossomed outside the port, battering the freighter violently. A tiny double-winged ball raced past the cockpit port. It followed us, Luke shouted. From Tatooine it couldn't have, objected a disbelieving Solo. Not in hyperspace. Kenobi was studying the configuration the tracking screen displayed. You're quite right, Han. It's the short-range TIE fighter. But where did it come from, the Corellian wanted to know. There are no Imperial bases near here. It couldn't have been a TIE job. Ha ha ha. You saw it pass. I know, it looked like a TIE fighter, but what about a base? It's leaving in a big hurry, Luke noted, studying the tracker. No matter where it's going, if it identifies us, we're in big trouble. Not if I can help it, Solo declared. Chewie, jam its transmission, lay in a pursuit course. It would be best to let it go, Kenobi ventured thoughtfully. It's already too far out of range, not for long. Several minutes followed, during which the cockpit was filled with a tense silence. All eyes were on the tracking screen and viewport. At first, the Imperial fighter tried a complex, evasive course to no avail. The surprisingly maneuverable freighter hung tight on its tail, continuing to make up the distance between them. Seeing that he couldn't shake his pursuers, the fighter pilot had obviously opened up his tiny engine all the way. Ahead, one of the multitude of stars was becoming steadily brighter. Luke frowned. They were moving fast, but not nearly fast enough for any heavenly objects to brighten so rapidly. Something here didn't make sense. Impossible for a fighter that small to be this deep in space on its own, Solo observed. It must have gotten lost, been part of a convoy or something, Luke hypothesized. Solo's comment was gleeful. Well, he won't be around long enough to tell anyone about us. We'll be on top of him in a minute or two. The star ahead continued to brighten its glow, evidently coming from within. It assumed a circular outline. He's heading for that small moon, Luke murmured. Dang it! The Empire must have an outpost there, Solo admitted, although according to the Atlas, Alderaan had no moons. He shrugged it off. Galactic topography was never one of my best subjects. I'm only interested in worlds and moons with customers on them. But I think I can get him before he gets there. He's almost in range. They drew steadily nearer. Gradually, craters and mountains on the moon became visible, yet there was something extremely odd about them. The craters were far too regular in outline, the mountains far too vertical, the canyons and valleys impossibly straight and regularized. Nothing as capricious as volcanic action had formed those features. That's no moon. And Kenobi breathed softly. That's a space station. But it's too big to be a space station, Solo objected. The size of it can't be artificial. It can't. I have a very strange feeling about this, was Luke's comment. Abruptly, the usually calm Kenobi was shouting, Turn the ship around. Let's get out of here. I think you're right, old man. Full reverse, Chewie. I love Chewie. He's great. The Wookiee started adjusting controls, and the freighter seemed to slow, arcing around in a broad curve. The tiny fighter leaped instantly toward the monstrous station until it was swallowed up by its overpowering bulk. Chewbacca chattered something at Solo as the ship shook and strained against unseen forces. Lock in auxiliary power, Solo ordered. Gauges began to whine in protest, and by ones and twos, every instrument on the control console sequentially went berserk. Try as he might, Solo couldn't keep the surface of the gargantuan station from moving steadily larger and larger until it became the heavens. Luke stared wildly at secondary installations as big as mountains, dish antenna larger than all of Mos Eisley. Why are we still moving toward it? Too late, Kenobi whispered softly. A glance at Solo confirmed his concern. We're caught in a tractor beam, the strongest one I've ever seen. It's dragging us in, the pilot muttered. You mean there's nothing you can do? Luke asked, feeling unbelievably helpless. Solo studied the Uh-oh. Dang it. I guess the question is... You know what? Never mind. Where was I? Solo studied the overloaded sensor readouts and shook his head. Not against this kind of power. I'm on full power myself, kid, and it's not shifting out of course a fraction of a degree. It's no use. I'm going to have to shut down or we'll melt our engines. But they're not going to suck me up like so much dust without a fight. He started to vacate the pilot's chair, but he was restrained by an aged yet powerful hand on his shoulder. An expression of concern was on the old man's face, and yet a suggestion of something somewhat less funeral. What? If it's a fight you cannot win, well, my boy, there are always alternatives to fighting. The true size of the battle station became apparent as the freighter was pulled closer and closer. Running around the station's equator was an artificial cluster of metal mountains, docking ports stretching beckoning fingers nearly 2 kilometers above the surface. Now only a minuscule speck against the gray bulk of the station, the Millennium Falcon was sucked toward one of those steel pseudopods, and finally swallowed by it. A lake of metal closed off the entryway, and the freighter vanished as if it had never existed. Vader stared at the motley array of stars displayed on the conference room map, while Tarkin and Admiral Motti conferred nearby. Interestingly, the first use of the most powerful destructive machine ever constructed had seemingly no influence at all on that map, which in itself represented only a tiny fraction of the section of one modest-sized galaxy. It would take a micro breakdown of a portion of this map to reveal a slight reduction in spatial mass, caused by the disappearance of Alderaan. Alderaan, with its many cities, farms, factories, and towns, and traders, Vader reminded himself. Ha! Despite his advances and intricate technological methods of annihilation, the actions of mankind remained unnoticeable to an uncaring, unimaginably vast universe. If Vader's grandest plans ever came to pass, all that would change. He was well aware that despite all their intelligence and drive, the vastness and wonder were lost on the two men who continued to chatter monkey-like behind him. Tarkin and Mati were talented and ambitious, but they saw things only on the scale of human pettiness. It was a pity, Vader thought, that they did not possess the scope to match their abilities. Still, neither man was a Dark Lord. As such, little more could be expected of them. These two were useful now and dangerous, but someday they, like Alderaan, would have to be swept aside. For now, he could not afford to ignore them. And while he would have preferred the company of equals, he had to admit reluctantly that at this point, he had no equals. Nevertheless, he turned to them and insinuated himself into the conversation. The defense systems on Alderaan, despite the Senator's protestations, to the contrary, were as strong as any in the Empire. I should conclude that our demonstration was as impressive as it was thorough. Tarkin turned to him, nodding. The Senate is being informed of our action at this very moment. Soon we will be able to announce the extermination of the Alliance itself, as soon as we've dealt with their main military base. Now that their main source of munitions, Alderaan, has been eliminated, the rest of those systems, with secessionist inclinations, will fall in line quickly enough, you'll see. Tarkin turned to an Imperial officer as an Imperial officer entered the chamber. Yes, what is it, Cass? The unlucky officer wore the expression of the mouse chosen to bell the cat. That is an apt description. Governor, the advanced scouts have reached and circumnavigated Dantooine. They have found the remains of a rebel base, but they estimate that it has been deserted for some time. Years, possibly. They are proceeding with an extensive survey of the remainder of the system. Tarkin turned apoplectic. His face darkening to a fine pomegranate fury. She lied. She lied to us. No one could see, but it seemed that Vader must have smiled behind his mask. Then we are even in the first exchange of truths. I told you she would never betray the rebellion unless she thought her confession could somehow destroy us in the process. Terminate her immediately, the governor was barely able to form words. Calm yourself, Tarkin. Which is a funny thing considering... Never mind. Vader advised him, you could throw away our only link to the real rebel base so casually. She can still be of value to us. Ah! You just said it yourself, Vader. We'll get nothing more out of her. I'll find that hidden fortress if I have to destroy every star system in this sector. A quiet yet demanding beep interrupted him. Yes, what is it? He inquired irritably. A voice reported over an unseen speaker. Sirs, we've captured a small freighter that was entering the remains of Alderaan. A standard check indicates that its markings apparently match that of the ship which blasted its way out of the quarantine at Mos Eisley's Tatooine system and went hyper before the Imperial blockade craft could close on it. Tarkin looked puzzled. Mos Eisley? Tatooine? What is this? What's this all about, Vader? It means, Tarkin, that the last of our unresolved difficulties is about to be eliminated. Someone apparently received the missing data tapes, learned who transcribed them, and was trying to return them to her. They might not be able to facilitate their meeting with the Senator. Or, we may be able to, excuse me. Tarkin started to say something, hesitated, then nodded in understanding. How convenient. I leave this matter in your hands, Vader. The Dark Lord bowed slightly, a gesture which Tarkin acknowledged with a perfunctory salute. Then he spun and strode from the room, leaving Mati looking from man to man in confusion. The freighter sat listlessly in the docking hangar of the huge bay. 30 armed Imperial troopers stood before the tower, before the lowered main ramp leading into the ship. What the beep? That scared me! Sorry, Artemis, I just scared my dog. Where was I? They snapped to attention when Vader and Commander approached. Vader halted at the base of the ramp, studying the vessel as an officer, and several soldiers came forward, I don't know why I do that. There was no reply to our repeated signals, sir, so we activated the ramp from outside. We've made no contact with anyone aboard, either by communicator or in person, the officer reported. Send your men in, Vader ordered. Turning, the officer relayed the command to a non-com who barked orders. What? A number of the heavily armored soldiers made their way up the ramp and entered the outer hold. They advanced with appreciable caution. Inside, 2 men covered a third as he advanced, moving in groups of 3 in this fashion. They rapidly spread through the ship. Corridors rang hollowly under metal-shod feet, and doors slid aside willingly as they were activated. Empty, the sergeant in charge finally declared in surprise. Check the cockpit. Several troopers made their way forward and slid the portal side, only to discover the pilot's chairs as vacant as the rest of the freighter. The controls were deactivated and all the systems shut down. Only a single light on the console winked on and off fitfully. The sergeant moved forward, recognized the source of the light, and activated the appropriate controls. A printout appeared on the nearby screen. He studied intently, then turned to convey the information to his superior, who was waiting by the main hatch. That worthy listened carefully before he turned and called down to the commander and Vader. There's no one aboard. The ship is completely deserted, sirs. According to the ship's log, her crew abandoned ship immediately after liftoff, then set her on automatics to Alderaan. Possibly a decoy, the commander ventured aloud. Then they should still be on Tatooine. Possibly, Vader admitted reluctantly. Several of the escape pods have been jettisoned, the officer went on. Did you find any droids on board? Vader called. No, sir, nothing. If there were any, they must have abandoned the ship along with the organic crew. Vader hesitated before replying. When he did so, uncertainty was evident in his voice. This doesn't feel right. Send a fully equipped scanning team on board. I want every centimeter of that ship checked out. See to it as soon as possible. With that, he whirled and stalked from the hangar, pursued by the infuriating feeling that he was overlooking something of vital importance. The rest of the assembled soldiers were dismissed by the officer. On board the freighter, a last lone figure left off the examining the space beneath the cockpit consoles and ran in to join his comrades. He was anxious to be off this ghost ship and back in the comfortable surroundings of the barracks. His heavy footsteps echoed through the once more empty freighter. Below, the muffled sounds of the officer giving final orders faded, leaving the interior in complete quiet. The quivering portion of the floor was the only movement on board. Abruptly, the quivering became a sharp upheaval. 2 metal panels popped forward, followed by a pair of tousled heads. Han and Luke looked around quickly, then managed to relax a little when it became clear that the ship was as empty as it sounded. Lucky you'd built these compartments, Luke commented. Solo was not as cheerfully confident. Where did you think I kept the smuggled goods? In the main hold? I admit I never expected to smuggle myself in them. He started violently at the sudden sound, but it was only another of the panels shifting aside. This is ridiculous. This isn't going to work. Even if I could take off and get past the closed hatch, he jabbed a thumb upward, we'd never get past that tractor beam. Another panel opened, revealing the face of an elderly imp. You leave that to me. I was afraid you'd say something like that, muttered Solo. You're a dang fool, old man. Kenobi grinned at him. What does that say of the man who allows himself to be hired by a fool? Solo muttered something under his breath as they pulled themselves clear of the compartments. Chewbacca was doing so with a good deal of grunting and twisting. 2 technicians had arrived at the base of the ramp. They reported to the 2 board soldiers guarding it. The ship's all yours, one of the troopers told them. If the scanners pick up anything, report it immediately. The men nodded, then strained to lug their heavy equipment up the ramp. As soon as they disappeared inside, a loud crash was heard. Both guards whirled, then heard a voice call, Hey, down there, could you give us a hand with this? One trooper looked at his companion, who shrugged. They both started up the ramp, muttering at the inefficiency of mere technicians. A second crashing sound reverberated, but now there was no one left to hear it. The absence of the 2 troopers was noticed soon thereafter. A gantry officer passing the window of a small command office near the freighter entrance glanced out, frowning when he saw no sign of the guards. Concerned but not alarmed, he moved to a comlink and spoke into it as he continued to stare at the ship. THX-1138, why aren't you at your post? THX-1138, do you copy? The speaker gave back only static. THX-1138, why don't you reply? The officer was beginning to panic when an armored figure descended the ramp and waved toward him, pointing to the portion of his helmet covering the right ear. The figure tapped it to indicate the comlink inside wasn't working. Shaking his head in disgust, the gantry officer gave his busy aide an annoyed look as he made for the door. Take over here. We've got another bad transmitter. I'm going to see what I can do. He activated the door, took a step forward as it slid aside, and stumbled backward in a state of shock. Filling the door completely was a towering, hairy form. Chewbacca leaned inward with a bone-splintering howl, flattened the benumbed officer with one swipe of a pan-sized fist. Yikes, that's a huge fist. The aide was already on his feet, reaching for his sidearm, when an air energy beam passed completely through him, piercing his heart. Oh, that's sad. Solo flipped up the faceplate of the trooper helmet, slid it back into place as he followed the Wookiee into the room. Kenobi and the droid squeezed in behind him, with Luke, also clad in the armor of a luckless Imperial soldier, bringing up the rear. Luke was looking around nervously as he shut the door behind them. Between his howling and your blasting everything in sight, it's a wonder the entire station doesn't know we're here. Bring 'em on, Solo demanded, and unreasonably enthused by their success so far. I prefer a straight fight to all this sneaking around. Maybe you're in a hurry to die, Luke snapped. But I'm not. All this sneaking around has kept us alive. The Corellian gave Luke a sour eye, but said nothing. They watched as Kenobi operated an incredibly complex computer console with the ease and confidence of one long accustomed to handling intricate machinery. How many more pages are left? Okay, we've got like 3 more. That is to say, about 5. Where was I? A screen lit up promptly with a map of sections of the battle station. The old man leaned forward, scrutinizing the display carefully. Meanwhile, 3PO and R2 had been going over an equally complicated control panel nearby. R2 suddenly froze and began whistling wildly at something he had found. Solo and Luke, their momentary disagreement over tactics forgotten, rushed over to where the robots were standing. Chewbacca busied himself hanging the gantry officer up on his toes. That sounds funny. Plug him in, Kenobi suggested, looking over from his place before the larger readout. He should be able to draw information from the entire station network. Excuse me. Let's see if he can find where the tractor beam power unit is located. Why not just disconnect the beam from here, sir? Luke wanted to know. It was Solo who replied derisively. And what, have them lock it right back on us before we can get a ship's length outside the docking bay? Luke looked crestfallen. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. We have to break the tractor at its power source in order to execute a clean escape, Luke. Old Ben chided gently as R2 punched a claw arm into the open computer socket he had discovered. Immediately, a galaxy of lights came to life on the panel in front of him, and the room was filled with the hum of machinery working at high speed. Several minutes passed while the little droid sucked up information like a metal sponge. Then the hum slowed, and he turned to keep something back at them. He's found it, sir, 3PO announced excitedly. The tractor beam is coupled to the main reactors at 7 locations. Most of the pertinent data is restricted, but he'll try to pull the critical information through the monitor. Kenobi turned his attention from the larger screen to a small readout near R2. Data began to race across it too fast for Luke to see, but apparently Kenobi somehow made something of the schematic blur. I don't think there's any way you boys can help with this, he told them. I must go alone. That suits me fine, Solo said readily. I've already done more than I bargained for on this trip, but I think putting that tractor beam out of commission is going to take a lot more than your magic, old man. Luke wasn't put off so easily. I want to go with you. Don't be impatient, young Luke. This requires skills you haven't yet mastered. Stay and watch over the droids and wait for my signal. They must be delivered to the rebel forces, or many more worlds will meet the same fate as Alderaan. Trust in the Force, Luke, and wait. With a last look at the flow of information on the monitor, Kenobi adjusted the lightsaber at his waist. Stepping to the door, he slid it aside, looked once left, once right, and then disappeared a long, glowing hallway. As soon as he was gone, Chewbacca growled, and Solo nodded in agreement. You said it, Chewie. He turned to look. Where'd you dig up that old fossil? Ben Kenobi, General Kenobi, is a great man, Luke protested loftily. Great at getting us into trouble, Solo snorted. General my afterburners. He. He's not going to get us out of here. You got any better ideas? Luke shot back, challengingly. Anything would be better than just waiting here for them to come and pick us up. If we... A hysterical whistling and hooting came from the computer console. Luke hurried over to R2-D2. The little droid was all but hopping about on stubby legs. What now? Luke asked 3PO. The taller robot looked puzzled himself. I'm afraid I don't understand either, sir. He says I found her and keeps repeating she's here, she's here. Who has he found? R2 turned a flat blinking face toward Luke and whistled frantically. Princess Leia, 3PO announced after listening carefully. Senator Organa, they seem to be one and the same. I believe she may be the person the message she was carrying. That three-dimensional portrait of indescribable beauty coalesced in Luke's mind again. The princess? She's here? Awkward. Attracted by the commotion, Solo wandered over. Princess, what's going on? Where is she? Luke demanded breathlessly, ignoring Solo completely. R2 whistled on while 3PO translated. Level 5 detention block AA23 or AA23, whatever you want to say, I don't care. According to the information, she's scheduled for slow termination. No, we've got to do something. What are you three blabbing about? An exasperated Solo demanded. She's the one who programmed the message into R2-D2, Luke explained hurriedly. The one we're trying to deliver to Alderaan. We've got to help her now. Just a minute, Solo cautioned him. This is going awfully fast for me. Don't get any funny ideas. When I said I didn't have any better ideas, I meant it. The old man said, to wait here, I don't like it, but I'm not going off on some crazy maze through this place. But Ben didn't know she was here, Luke half pleaded, half argued. I'm sure if he knew, he would have changed his plans. Anxiety turned to thoughtfulness. Now, if we could just figure out a way to get into that detention block. Solo shook his head and stepped back. I'm not going into any Imperial detention blocks. If we don't do something, they're going to execute her. A minute ago, you said you didn't want to just sit here and wait to be captured. Now all you want to do is stay. Which is it, Han? The Corellian looked troubled and confused. Marching into a detention area is not what I had in mind. We're likely to end up in there anyway. Why rush it? But they're going to execute her. Better her than me. Where's your sense of chivalry, Han? Solo considered. Near as I can recall, I traded it for a 10-carat chrysopat. Yeah. And 3 bottles of good brandy about 5 years ago on Commodore. I've seen her, Luke persisted desperately. She's beautiful. So's life. I mean, I guess he's got a point. She's rich and powerful. She's a rich and powerful senator, Luke pressed, hoping an appeal to Solo's baser instincts might be more effective. If we could save her, the reward could be substantial. Rich. Then Solo looked disdainful. Wait a minute. Reward from whom? The government on Alderaan? He made a sweeping gesture toward the hangar and, by implication, the space where Alderaan had once orbited. Luke thought furiously. If she's being held here and is scheduled to be executed, that means she must be dangerous in some way to whoever destroyed Alderaan, to whoever had the station built. He can bet it had something to do with the Empire instituting a reign of full oppression. I'll tell you who will pay for her rescue and for the information she holds. The Senate, the Rebel Alliance, and every concern that did business with Alderaan. She could be the sole surviving heir of the off-world wealth of the entire system. The reward could be more wealth than you can imagine. I don't know, I can imagine quite a bit. He glanced at Chewbacca, who grunted a terse reply. Solo shrugged back at the big Wookiee. All right, we'll give it a try, but you'd better be right about that reward. What's your plan, kid? Luke was momentarily taken aback. All his energies up until now had been concentrated on persuading Solo and Chewbacca to aid in a rescue attempt. That accomplished, Luke became aware he had no idea how to proceed. He had grown used to old Ben and Solo giving directions. Now the next move was up to him. His eyes were caught by several metal circlets dangling from the belts of Solo's armor. Give me those binders and tell Chewbacca to come over here. Solo handed Luke the thin but quite unbreakable cuffs and relayed the request to Chewbacca. The Wookiee lumbered over and stood next to Luke. Now I'm going to put these on you, Luke began, starting to move behind the Wookiee with the cuffs, and Chewbacca made a sound low in his throat, and Luke jumped in spite of himself. Now, he began again. Han is going to put these on you, and he sheepishly handed the binders to Solo, uncomfortably aware that the enormous anthropoids and glowing eyes on him. Solo sounded amused as he moved forward. Don't worry, Chewie, I think I know what he has in mind. The cuffs barely fit around the thick wrists. Despite his partner's seeming confidence in the plan, the Wookiee wore a worried, frightened look as the restraints were activated. Luke, sir, Luke looked over at 3PO. Pardon me for asking, but what should R2 and I do if someone discovers us here in your absence? Hope they don't have blasters, Solo replied. 3PO's tone indicated he didn't find the answer humorous. That wasn't very reassuring. Luke and Solo were too engrossed in their coming expedition to pay attention to the worried robot. They adjusted their helmets, then, with Chewbacca wearing a half-real, downcast expression, they started off along the corridor where Ben Kenobi had disappeared. This was a much longer chapter than the last few, huh? How many pages was that? Let's see. Wow, almost 30. That's a good chunk of the book. Good chunk. Anyway, that'll be it for today. So sorry. I know I spent like 2 minutes showing off the lightsabers and everything. I like that you can see them. Look, it's purple. Anyway, I think I'm only going to get one video up today, if only because family wants to go have lunch with a family friend at their new restaurant. And I don't want to make us late. On the other hand, I do have to go into work today, and it's like 2 towns over. Well, not 2 towns over, but, you know, it's pretty out of the way. So I don't think I'd make it to work in time if I went. So I don't know. I'll if I get a second video up, you'll see. Until next time, goodbye, everybody. Say hi to the turtles.